Hey guys, I'm Sai, and welcome to Ace Podcast Nation. Here at our podcast network and YouTube channel, we've got podcasts, interviews, and content on all sorts of subjects, including a weekly football show every Monday live on youtube.com/Ace Podcast Nation and Facebook Live on our podcast page, which is the Andy Campbell Show, featuring former Premier League striker Andy Campbell and myself, breaking down the championship action from the weekend before. We also release shows Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday of each week. They're all available in video format at youtube.com/podcast nation and all audio podcasting platforms. So I have joining me today to talk about, I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting show as we go through some stuff and an even better conversation. I'm very excited to speak to this gentleman because I was a big fan growing up, and it's going to be a good one. I'm really excited. So joining me, he played for England over 80 times in Test match and one-day internationals, as well as playing for Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, and Surrey. Fast bowler, Mr. Chris Lewis. Welcome, Chris. How are you today?
I'm very well. Just finished a gym session.
There you go.
Good.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to this, and I was excited when you got back to me when I had messaged you. Not everyone does. You'll be surprised to know that. But you just gotta, I understand though, because obviously a lot of the time I'm contacting people sort of cold who maybe don't know me, so it's people are a bit skeptical or a bit wary of who's messaging them. But yeah, I appreciate you getting back to me and sorting it out, because I'm really looking forward to it. You have lots of stuff which has happened over the years, whether it's your career or afterwards. You've got a very interesting story. But in order to get kind of a feel for you as a person, rather than just jumping into all that stuff, I'd like to sort of go back to the start really and talk about your upbringing. Obviously, well, in your words will be better than mine, I'd say. Where did it start for you?
Well, I was born on St. Valentine's Day in 1966 in a place called Guyana, which is a former British colony in South America. And to be honest, growing up was very English in a sense. Being a former colony, it was kind of speak when you're spoken to, kids to be seen and not heard, and go to school. So it was all kind of disciplined in that sense.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
once that was all over, you got the hang of that. As a young person, the environment was quite safe. We ran around inside and out day and night. And certainly for us at the time in Guyana, the things that we did most of all was play cricket, because it was a time where I think all of the Caribbean, were inspired by the quality of cricketers that we were producing at the time.
Oh yeah.
You The Sobers, the Hunts, the Three Ws, um, all those sort of guys beforehand. And then more of my generation, you're then talking Richards, Lloyd, Greenwich, Holden. So as young people, we were all running around trying to sort of emulate um, our heroes. And I mean, most of them we'd never actually seen play before. We just heard them on the radio. But as
Hmm.
young boys, we all ran around and tried to do that. So overall, um, the childhood, I think, was a really, really happy one where we played around a lot. I know later on in life, you can look back at these things with a little bit of blinkers on. But um, no, it was just a fun time where I got to play a lot of cricket. I was very physical. And although I didn't know it at that time, all that physicality and stuff would actually help me later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, did you play any other sports like back then?
You know, it was funny until I came to England, and I came to England as a 10-year-old. I'd never actually kicked a football. I'd
Wow.
never really tried any other sports. The closest we kind of came to doing other things sports wise was playing with our bikes, um, which was one thing, and we would literally climb trees, or we would do a form of gymnastics, which is we'd put one of those old tires, big from a truck, on the floor, and literally run and jump off it, and you get
Hmm.
that spring off it, and we do flips. So it was kind of more making your own entertainment
Yeah, of
at that.
course.
Even the cricket stuff that we used, we made it. We made our bats from the wooden panes or the wooden slats in our family's fence, which, as you can imagine, would be problematic for a while because after a bit, there are a few holes about it, you know.
Yeah, I bet.
We made our balls from used tires. We cut them up and put them around a seed, and it would be a bouncy ball. So it was a time where you kind of had to do a lot of stuff. You had to make your own entertainment. Um, Not all as, let's say, benign as cricket. So you got into trouble a few times. But
Yeah.
it was an environment where we had lots of fun. And a lot of those things helped me when I eventually came to England.
Yeah, I suppose it's a different time. Even like when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, we had to make our own entertainment, our own fun. I remember one time the field, which was kind of just up the road from us, where we used to play cricket, but it was the grass was cut by the council, so you were reliant on it being short enough to play cricket or even football sometimes. And one summer, I remember my father came up with like a push along lawnmower and spent about 2 hours just cutting the grass really short, so we had a cricket strip. But I mean, obviously, these days I've got three kids now, and they very much it's a different world, I guess, as well. There's more dangers, I think, out there. You've got more things to worry about. Um, so they don't they still go out, but they don't experience the same. I think of it personally like the same joys of when I was younger. I would go out for almost go out after breakfast and come back for tea, and be able to spend the whole day out just wandering, exploring, playing football, playing cricket. And then unfortunately, the world we live in now, kids can't do that because parents get very paranoid if they haven't spoken to their kids for a couple of hours and they're out the house because of there's various things going on, I guess.
No, for sure, we live in a very, I was going to say dangerous, but a very different world. Um, and obviously things have changed accordingly. But I think also the people have changed in the sense that I don't know many youngsters who necessarily want to go out rambling or want to go
Yeah, yeah,
out walking,
yeah, it's
if,
true.
if you see what I mean. So I suppose it's just one of those you accept that at the time when I was growing up, this is the way things were done because to an extent, this is what was available,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we are
that's
in a
it, isn't
different
it?
world where there's so many different things vying for people's attention and so forth, and people have grown up being comfortable with other things. Part of I suppose, the flip side of mom not letting you out is that you might not necessarily grow up being the sort of person who wants to go out walking too much.
Yeah, I suppose there's lots of different aspects to it, isn't there? Because
Yeah,
like when
it's
I
an
was
interesting
younger.
one.
Go on, sorry.
But I think to be honest, whatever our environment is as it was then, I think our environment can serve us as it did me. And I think that there are so many wonderful things about the world that we live in also today, which I would look back and go, oh, I'm so glad they've invented that because I certainly didn't want to do that anymore. So it's
Yeah,
what I mean. So you can pick and mix and match it, and perhaps that's the beauty of it. It just means that we have more choice.
yeah, I think so. So you mentioned you moved to England age 10. How was that as like an adaptation for a 10-year-old child? Obviously, move into a completely different country and environment.
Well, do you know the funny thing is when people ask that question, sometimes I get the impression that in the back of it, that the expectation is that that would be hard.
Mm,
And what I would say, it was different. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say use the word hard at all. Coming from the Caribbean wasn't a chore for me. It was an excitement. I'd been
okay.
kind of built up to that for a while because my parents were here. It was my expectation to come here. So when I came, I was so excited. Excited to be in England, not just because my parents were here, excited to be in England, that place that we'd heard all those wonderful stories about as a young person. So my take in it, it was a positive move. Now, of course, going to school, I think it was probably the first place I became really self-aware because previously, pretty much everybody looked like me.
Yeah, of course.
Didn't have to really think about anything, you know. My big afro and
Hmm.
my West Indian features all fitted in perfectly where I was. But here I was in a new environment and became a little bit self-conscious because not everybody looked like me. And obviously, from a cultural point of view, there are different things to get used to, different foods. The fact that I didn't even actually have a football team that I supported. I
Yeah, I
mean,
suppose that would be different as
that
well,
would be
wouldn't
that would be the worst crime of all.
it?
I mean, who are you? You haven't got a football team? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. How can you not?
Yeah. The,
So I picked that up very quickly, and very quickly I had to pick one. So I picked Liverpool
oh
all
dear.
those years ago. I know. And 40 years later, especially this year, I'm very proud that I picked them.
Yeah, I bet.
But it's been a long wait. But of course, there was cricket at school, and eventually summer came, and I say I joined the cricket team, but I didn't. I went to trials and I made the cricket team, and that kind of transformed my life in England because as a young person, once I'd done the stuff that I needed to do, the chores or go to school or whatever your parents wanted to do, the thing I wanted to do the most was play cricket. And here was an environment, um, even though I was a passionate cricketer, I'd never actually played a proper game of cricket in the Caribbean. All my games had been on the street, just playing with friends.
So that must have been a different experience in itself, playing, because obviously playing in the street with your friends is different to a kind of formal match with rules and whatnot.
Um, all it did, and it's not a small thing, was increase my passion of our desire for the game. After playing cricket for so long and then finally putting on a pair of whites, some bowling boots, and the floppy hat. I
Yeah.
remember that first Saturday afternoon playing for Wilson High in the park. Um, I'm sure I felt like Viv Richards that day. I had the floppy hat on, I had the SS Jumbo, and it was such a brilliant experience having played cricket. I mean, all my life, meaning for 10 years, but never actually had the chance to actually hold the kit and all that.
Yeah,
And
of
here I
course.
was on a proper cricket pitch with proper gears,
Mhm.
playing a match. Um, I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that forever. Um, it was it was really really nice, and I suppose that Saturday afternoon was when I suppose I realized that I'd be comfortable. I'd be very comfortable in my new environment because, as you sort of mentioned before that, it was more coming to terms with my new environment and not really being used to anything. And when I say being not the odd one out, but being the one that didn't necessarily understand
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
everything on cricket made that easier for me because I became the captain of the school team. And all of a sudden, from the guy who had just come, I was the captain of the school team, and there was a certain amount of acceptance with that. And,
Yeah,
it
and I
was
suppose you makes it sport brings people together generally, doesn't it? Whether you're spectating or taking part. And as a young kid, once you start playing in a team, you automatically make friends with the people from the team, particularly if you're captain and if a cricket team where you've got to, tell people where to go in fielding settings and bowlers and things like this. So you instantly, you're interacting with people straight away.
but
Um,
also it just meant that there was a topic that I suppose you and your new friends saw eye to eye at, in the
yeah,
sense that there was cultural difference. The games that we played or how we went about our lives was different. But here was this sport, and we all knew how to do it because the rules were the same pretty much here or there. You know, so it was a place where we could actually come together and from there um, kind of build relationships and on a personal level. Um, feel that
Absolutely. So, how did you, or when did you go from kind of playing school cricket? Did you like join a club then, or did you go from school cricket into county cricket?
No, it was a funny one. Is that when I came, I played for the school team, and in between that, I was just playing the park. Again, it wasn't until I was 15 that I realized that I could actually go and join a club because, again, coming from the Caribbean, we didn't, not we didn't, there were cricket clubs, but we didn't necessarily join them. So I didn't even imagine that there were cricket clubs where little boys could go and play cricket. But when I did, I remember I went up to my first cricket club, which was a cricket club called South Hampstead. And a friend and I went to do a bit of a look before we joined. And we looked through the gate, and I'd never seen an outfield that was so immaculate. It looked like laid carpet. And even before we'd spoken to them, we just went, yeah, we're joining there. And that was my first club, South Hampstead. I was 15 by that time. But an interesting tidbit is that I was going to end up, I suppose, in my international career, being more of a bowler than a batter. But as an 11-year-old, I couldn't even bowl overarm. You know, I
Yeah.
hadn't learned to bowl because my plan was simple. I was going to play cricket, but I was always going to be the next Viv Richards, like so many people. I wasn't planning to do anything else. Um, but joining that school team, I learned to bowl overarm. And then when I eventually went to Southampton, um, I found myself bowling a little bit more. And it was as a 16-year-old, I was having some nets at Lord's. And although I didn't know, a former international and now coach at Leicester, Ken Higgs, was on the balcony. And Ken obviously saw something that he thought he could work with. And Ken pursued that, and he pursued that quite vigorously. Because late in the year, I was asked for trials to go to Leicester, which I declined only because I hadn't really left London before. And I still wanted to be at Middlesex. But by the end of the summer, Ken had phoned back and offered me a 2-year contract um, to fulfill my dream. Now, bearing
Okay.
in mind, I'm playing in the park, and the club I'm at now is Wembley. I'm not a regular in the first team. I play on Sunday. So on Saturdays, I'm in the two.
All
And
right.
here I am. And this guy is offering me the opportunity to fulfill the only dream I've ever had. And that was to play professional cricket. It was kind of mad. A happy
Yes.
mad. A happy mad. You're just so excited. And off I wandered off with excitement to Leicester. And it wasn't until I kind of got to Leicester and was in the ground and you bump into David Gow, you bump into Peter Willie, and then the expectation is that you're going to be in the same team. And I was like, wow, okay, how is this going to work now? At some point, somebody's going to walk in and go, we've made a mistake, Mr. Lewis. You aren't supposed to be here. Literally. I mean, a couple of
Yeah.
months, I'm playing in the park with my mates,
That
and
must have been a huge step up.
um, I, to be honest, I thought it was, and I suppose it was in a sense, but as a young boy, I just played cricket. So my head was kind of clear. I just watched the
Yeah.
ball, and it didn't really matter who was bowling. I kind of just went through the same thing. And I think that helped because in my first year at Leicester, I was successful enough to be selected in 1987, at the end of that summer, to tour Australia with Young England,
Okay.
and that's with Mike Atherton, captain, Nasser Hussain, Mark Ramprakash, um, Mark Elaine, Pete Martin, Martin Bicknell, Simon Brown, Warren Hegg. Um,
Some team.
oh, wow. Um, some team. So from literally from being in a place of nowhere, just playing a bit of second 11 cricket for my club as a 16, 17-year-old, here I am as a 19-year-old representing England um, in the Youth World Cup. Um, it was it was fast. Um, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that life.
Chris, can I ask you a bit of a favour? Would you be able to unplug your headphones for me? I'm just getting a little bit of feedback off them.
Yeah, no problem.
And we'll just do it without. Sorry to be a pain. It's just
No, that's all right.
I
Is
don't
that
want to.
better?
Yeah, that's much better. I don't know
Okay.
why I did, but just I'll take that little bit out anyway.
Okay.
So you mentioned there you played in the youth or the young youth World Cup with there's quite some famous names who you played alongside there who obviously went on and played international cricket for England to varying degrees. Obviously, the World Cup will come back into your career a bit further down the line. So after you're playing for Young England, you've gone to play or to join a professional team. How long was it before? What was the kind of time frame from there to playing first team county cricket?
It's funny. I was fortunate enough in that in my first year at Leicester, I got in to the first team for various reasons. Now, at the time, Leicester's first team was pretty impressive with the bowlers we had. We
Yeah.
had Agnew, Taylor, De Freitas, Parsons, Paddy Clift, and a whole host of other seamers. So there wasn't any expectation on my part, really, to get into that team. But over the course of summer, injuries and everything else, I played one or two games that first year on staff. I think it may only been two or three, to be honest, but I got a taste, and certainly it was an eye opener because the standards were very different between the second team cricket I was playing and doing quite well in, and that first class game. And it was probably until the following year that I got in a little bit more consistently. I
Okay.
think so. I would say in my case, it was probably a couple of years before I broke into the first team um, consistently, which again was a surprise. My expectation was perhaps to be in the second team at that time you were talking about was a 4 or 5 years and then hopefully get in. But things were running really quickly for me from what you might say is a complete stand-in start because I wasn't the one who was destined to play first class cricket. I was the one who was going to be a good club cricketer. And
Okay.
what made the difference, I suppose, and I think people were perhaps right, but what made the difference is that people were assessing me as a batsman, and my bowling hadn't come online yet. And then my bowling came online, and that was the thing that people noticed more. And that was the thing that I suppose I was going to make my name with later on. But a lot of the times when I was younger, I simply didn't bowl a lot.
Yeah, I watched an interview you did. I think it was with Cricket Life Stories, and one of the things which sort of caught my eye was when the guy who was interviewing you. He mentioned some quotes which Derek Pringle had made, and it was something that I was already thinking of bringing up to you. Was that I kind of feel like the media and fellow cricketers have had plenty to say, have plenty to say about kind of it's quite often like this trotted out line that you were super talented, you were a very talented cricketer, but your head wasn't right or you were kind of confused and stuff. And I've always thought that's a bit kind of disrespectful because to me, you don't play 80 to 80 plus times for England cricket team on just talent alone. Now, if you did, say, for an example, Ravel Morrison would have played for England football team 100 times by now because he's supremely talented, but for whatever reason, he hasn't been able to settle, whether it's because he doesn't put the work in or whatever it may be. But I feel like you've just said there, when you were when you've joined Leicestershire, they're looking at you as a batsman. and your bowling hasn't really come along yet, that didn't just magically happen. You had to put the work in to get there. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's amazing, and that's always been my argument, that nothing magically happens.
No,
That's
it does
always
not.
been my argument. I don't know where you guys get this from. You think that there's just some people who just turn out, and then the first day they can magically bowl at 100 miles an hour, or do this or do that. And the surprising thing is that these are ex-professionals, and
Yeah.
they know that. So from my point of view, I've always looked at it as people taking cheap shots. It's an easy
Yeah.
shot because they know how much work they've had to put in. And we can see that even the very best of cricketers, if they take time off, fall off the pace,
Yes.
no matter how talented you are. So if you don't put in a level of work, you can't acquire that level, that standard. And you certainly can't go and compete with people who are working day in and day out. And I've always found it a little slighting that other professionals would suggest, and what they suggest is that I don't work for what I have, but without saying it, suggesting that they've had to put in a lot of work to make a load of their meager talent, so to speak. And that's the
Yeah.
conversation. That's the conversation I'm having all the time. And of course, I don't see it that way, because I remember actually having to learn to do all those things. I remembered when I couldn't do them,
Yeah.
and like everybody else. But you know, such thing, they're so past, in the sense is that
Yes.
that conversation is a dead conversation, because it's such an old one, and we live in a place now where people can look and see that, because of the one day stuff, that anybody who puts in the work gets better.
Yes.
The fielding, everybody is now a brilliant fielder, regardless of how talented or not they are. They've put in the work, and it shows in their performance. So it's there for everybody to see and to go, no, it doesn't work that way, if they want to, because there's loads of evidence to suggest no matter who you are, if you put in the work, you'll become better. And that's the philosophy we use on everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, from my own personal experience, I had a certain degree of talent at football, and more so at cricket, where in my teens I played to like a county level, but I didn't want to put the work in, and I didn't want to train, so I would miss training or I'd miss work. So I never got to find out whether I would have been good enough or not. It doesn't really, it's the past. And that's why the reason I brought it up is because you said, like, about you weren't, your bowling wasn't quite there, so you had to put the work in to do it. And I just think that, like I said, I just found it astonishing that professional cricketers would say that, particularly some of them who, back then, particularly a lot of bowlers were bowlers who couldn't field, and the fielding was kind of left to the batsman. Do you think, like, in many ways, like, you were one of the first real athletes in the England team, whereby you could bowl, you could bat, you could field, you were athletic, you were in shape? Do you feel
I,
like maybe you were more suited towards today's cricket, where everyone, like you mentioned, everyone can field, everyone can bat, not everyone can bat, but everyone can field athletically and is in good shape? And
I wouldn't necessarily say more suited. I mean, I'll be honest, is that the fact that people thought that I was athletic or around there at a time where not everybody was a great mover, I would suggest in a large part worked in my benefit.
yeah,
Yeah, if you see what I mean.
yeah.
Playing now with all the things that was going on, I think would be so exciting, to kind of put all those things together, and in a personal level, actually focus on things that perhaps was only you focused on a little bit. There was only so much time that you could put into your fielding. I wondered if I could have put even more time into my field in another aspect. Um,
Oh no. Oh no. Oh,
Sorry
you
about
just
that. That was the
it's all
phone
right. You
ringing.
just cut out a little bit.
Yeah. The thought of playing today is exciting, but I enjoyed my time. When I played, that was my time. I don't think I was the first athlete. I mean, we I think athletes play sports, generally speaking. I mean,
Yeah,
you go back in time in English cricket, and so many of those guys played other sports. So
yeah,
clearly they were athletes. We've had Ian Botham, we've had Phil De Freitas. So we've had a host of athletes who have played for England, not just modern day athletes, into the past, people who could play many different sports. So in that sense, I was just one of many in that
yeah.
sense.
Okay. So when you've obviously you've been playing for Leicestershire for a while. When did you, or do you remember getting the call for England that first time?
Yeah, well, yeah. Actually, I was in Kenya at the time. I'd been selected to go on an England A tour with Graham Thorpe. Keith Fletcher was the coach, and whilst there, Keith Fletcher got a call that Ricardo Elcock, um, Middlesex and Worcester fast bowler. Now he'd got a stress fracture in his back, and he'd failed the fitness test, and he was going to be sent home. And they decided that I was going to fly out to the Caribbean and replaced him. And I flew into Trinidad again, not expecting to play. And I think Philip De Freitas was ill on the morning of the game. And with half an hour to go before the game, I'm told that I was going to actually play my first test. And even as I speak the words, the emotions come back because it was, well, to say the least, emotional.
Yeah, I
I
bet.
for a long time, as I'd mentioned, the only kind of dreams I had at those times were dreams about cricket. So to be able to, or to be at that moment, to be about to make my international debut for England, but not only that, I'd be facing Viv Richards, Desmond Haynes, Gordon Greenwich. It was just mad.
I was going to say that must have been some experience, because I suppose in many ways, because you had the call late, you didn't have that time to maybe get nervous or even get too excited about it, because you only had an hour or so to really get your head, and you would have been obviously thinking about the game and things like that. But to bowl against
No,
those guys must have been
I was
incredible.
buzzing. I was absolutely buzzing. I was tingling all over. Um, I don't think I could focus on one thing.
Mhm.
My mind was just running everywhere, but not in a bad way. It was just excitement. Um, the whole excitement of the place kind of ramped up for me. And I perhaps only came back to reality an hour into the game when Graham Gooch gave me the ball to bowl. And as I turned around to bowl, I was about to run into bowl to Gordon Greenwich. I
Jeez.
almost crapped myself.
Do you remember much of that test?
Well, it was a one day,
Okay, sorry.
and I remember getting Desmond Haynes out. I remember taking a catch, and I remember it being called off halfway through.
Yeah.
So I think West Indies just batted. So the game was actually abandoned. But oh mate, I didn't care. Just I just played cricket. I just played cricket for England. Um, and to be honest, at that moment, if I hadn't played another game for England, that would have been me overachieving in the dreams that I had. Um, you hope, but never necessarily thought. Um, Certainly as a young boy in the Caribbean, that I would ever make it to those heights.
Yeah, and I mean, in many ways, it's your first test is just the beginning. You went on to play uh, over 80 times for England in test matches and one day internationals. Um, One of my favourite memories of you as an England player, like growing up, is actually as a batsman, um, batting against, I think it was the West Indies, around it must have been about 91, and I would have been what 10 then, and you kind of you batted like batsmen bat now in many ways, like aggressive, and I think you scored like 60 odd. But I just remember watching it and thinking, you don't see many English batsmen uh, carting with the West Indian bowlers all around the ground, especially in the 90s. England quite consistently lost to the West Indian fast bowlers, and yeah, that's just a memory, one which sticks out for me. That innings in particular.
Well, as the saying goes, I suppose every dog has his day, even with a bat. And that was one of my better ones. Um, in fact, I remember it clearly. That's how good it was, or that's how unusual it was. I remember that not. Um, it was instinctive. It was, I suppose, chancy, but also at the same time, we didn't have much to lose.
No.
We were up against it, and I suppose a little sort of counter-attacking sort of knock. I think put Derek. Funny enough, Derek and I think, had a little partnership um, in that game. But do you know those are the days that I dreamt of as a young boy? Being in a cricket
Absolutely.
field in an international match, batting hand, summer's day, and just playing shots. Um, Unfortunately, that didn't happen as often as I would like. But yes, that was one of the days. And occasionally, I still have a look at that and remind myself that, look, you used to be able to play.
Do you know what? I don't blame you though, because and obviously there was other performances over the years where you contributed a great deal to English cricket during those 80 odd caps. Obviously, you played a World Cup final as well. What was that like to play in a World Cup final?
Um, I think I missed it. And what I mean in that is that sometimes you can almost miss the whole occasion. And I think at that World Cup final, we played good cricket. There are a lot of games where I played good cricket, won man of the matches, but there was so much more to appreciate in that final. And it's hard to put it into words. Um, but perhaps I appreciate that game now more looking back, to be able to go, okay, we lost, but at least I had the opportunity to play in a World Cup final.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
perhaps you should have just enjoyed the whole experience a little bit more. Perhaps in doing that, it might have just taken the pressure off and allowed the performance to flow.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess that's probably not the easiest thing always to do, is it? Is because it's such a big occasion. Um,
um, it's a World Cup final, but perhaps sometimes you can over process that,
yeah,
um,
of course.
and be so tight that it doesn't allow you to perform, and it doesn't even allow you to appreciate the whole occasion and appreciate the achievement of the team and in actually getting there in the first place. Um, but with hindsight and with time, I can look back at that and go, I'm so proud that I got the opportunity, not just to play at the World Cup, but to represent England in a World Cup final. That's massive. We lost, which was a disappointment and was for a long time, because I felt that we were good enough and we were playing good enough cricket that we could have won that tournament. But yet still, I had that opportunity. Um, it's just about looking back at myself as a young boy and going, could you imagine that you would have had the opportunity to do all those things? And the answer is just no, 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 no. So to have had that
Yeah,
opportunity, I just go, wow, I'm so grateful that I've had that and been able to experience those things.
yeah, and I mean it goes to show like how much of an achievement it was to reach that World Cup final and play in that World Cup final, because only a very, very few select few England players have ever done that, even now. You know, it's not a massive long list of, you know, players who've done it every, you know, 4 years or whatever, and it's a regular thing. It's been done a few times. Obviously they've won the one recently, but I mean, it's not something which is achieved by everyone, and it's almost like a common theme where we've just been talking now. We've just been talking about your career, is that you achieved a lot of the things that you grew up dreaming of in terms of cricketing career. You achieved those things, whether it was playing international cricket or playing professional cricket to start with, playing international cricket, playing in a World Cup final, you know, scoring a 50 or scoring 100 or taking wickets. It's all these things that you dreamt of growing up, you achieved. So, like, in
No,
hindsight now, it must be amazing to look back and, you know, see it from looking back on it all.
do you know what? Sometimes there's more joy in this space looking back because you can appreciate it more. A little bit like that World Cup final. You can get caught in the middle of so many things and actually forget that you're in a really, really good place and that you
Yeah.
should be actually enjoying your experience. You can be caught up so much in the result or doing this or doing that or even in what, in my case, what other people think that you should be achieving, that you don't necessarily appreciate that actually you're doing all right.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think, like, so again, I was going to ask you about this kind of thing to see when I played cricket, like I mentioned, like as a teenager, and I kind of got to a decent level. Not comparing myself to you, but just for this particular anecdote, when I was like 15, 16, I used to dye my hair all sorts of colors. And one day I turned up to play a county match and I had, I think, orange hair.
Oh, that would have gone
So,
well.
yeah, so the coach pulled me to one side and said, Simon, you know, this orange hair sort of thing, this is not the way we do things. And I was kind of like, well, you know, I was polite, and because I was a kid, I respected that. I still do respect the coach who said it, and kind of I said, okay. But afterwards, I thought, well, I'm there to play cricket. It doesn't really matter what I look like, sort of thing. But
Okay.
so the thing I was going to ask you is, over the years, particularly in around the 90s, because I do think attitudes have kind of changed towards that sort of thing. Did people constantly tell you that you had to act a certain way or do certain things or be a certain person from
Oh, for
within the
sure.
cricket world?
What I didn't realize, I was joining a cricket club, but these cricket clubs were more like lifestyle places. I was naive enough, a little bit, I use the word naive, to think that I was actually just going to play cricket.
Yeah.
But you had to fit in. Your
Mhm.
personality had to fit in, your dress code had to fit in. It was like almost joining the military in the sense that it all had to be very uniform and there wasn't a great deal of scope for somebody being themselves.
Yeah.
In walked the bloke who just come from the Caribbean.
Hmm.
If you see that,
Yeah.
yeah. And I didn't have an appreciation, certainly in my younger days, of that it wasn't just about playing cricket. It was about fitting in so many different ways. Cricketers don't do this, cricketers don't do this. This is the way you dress. We go to the pub afterwards, and there was a whole host of stuff that apparently was in my contract that I wasn't aware of.
All right. Okay.
Let's just say for a lot of years, or perhaps all my career, that was problematic. Uh, to start with, because I didn't understand, and then later on, once I actually understood that I still wanted to be me and not somebody else.
Yes. Do you think so? Obviously, as your international career and then your county career um, came to an end, one of the questions which someone sent in actually was, did you feel let down by the people within the sort of the ECB and maybe the clubs that you were representing at the time, as your career ended? Because gone.
Yeah, it's massively. My career ended in controversy, and although I think a lot of it had been controversial, this was very different. I got this one right, and I was shoved in it.
Yeah.
Straight. We can muck around with nice words, but I did the right thing, the thing that everybody said I should do, and I did that. Yeah, and they shoved me under a bus. That's how I see it here. People can put it in a nicer term, but that's what went on. So yes, when I left, more than perhaps let down, I just simply felt angry. I think is a pretty fair assessment of my emotions at that time. And in
Yeah, I
fact,
mean, I don't
at the
blame you,
time
to
I
be
left,
honest.
I officially I still had a contract,
Okay.
but just couldn't be in that place.
Yeah, so just for kind of people maybe who aren't aware of what we're referring to, obviously, you were approached by. I'm going off the article, so you'd have to
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong or anything like that. You're basically approached by an Indian bookmaker who wanted you to kind of.
How you doing, mate? He's looking at thinking, who the fuck's he? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, sorry about
All
that.
good. You're all good. Yeah, that's fine. So you reported this to the ECB, as you should have. And then after that, you didn't get the reaction that I think if that was if an England cricketer was in this position again now and they reported it, you would think that they would be pretty much praised for it universally because that's the right thing to do. They didn't go the other way. They reported it. They did what they should have done. You didn't get that reaction.
Listen, it wasn't what I reported was something that they simply didn't want to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah? And when it came into the public domain, rather than dealing with it, as I said, they chucked me in front of the bus, pretending that I hadn't told them, and a whole lot of other things, and pretty much left the press to do as they please while they kept quiet. Yeah, that's simply how it was. But again, like so many things, we're talking about something 20 years ago.
Yeah,
and
of course.
we're talking about the emotions and how I felt about it at that time. And at that time, I was very, very angry about a lot of things. Here we are 20 years later, and no matter how angry you were then, 20 years later, you should have processed it and moved on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And get into more a happy place. And what I would say about this, and that's not to let anybody off the hook or anything like that, is that I suppose if you're the person in charge of English cricket making those decisions, perhaps your perception and how you go about things is very different. Where from my perception, it was all about my career.
Of course, yeah.
You understand me?
Yeah, of course.
But and that's not me agreeing with anything.
No.
That's just me saying that, you know, people have a different view and they have different concerns. And clearly the concern at that time wasn't about me.
No, they didn't. They weren't too concerned about you as an individual, you as for your career. It was seemed to be more about the ECB's perception, maybe shall we say, in the press or whatever you want to, just overall, which is it's a shame because obviously your career is pretty much over at that point because they've chucked you under the bus, as you said. Now, if you don't mind, if you talk us through kind of what happened after that, and then we'll go from there.
Lots of things. I went away, played club cricket in Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, opened an academy in Slough, Cricket Academy. We're still playing some cricket for the PCA, actually.
Okay.
And at 40, I'm spotted by Martin Bicknell, an old teammate, who still thinks I can do a job in the 2020. And in the space of a few months, here I am making a comeback at the Oval. You know,
That must have been
excited.
surreal.
Yeah, but excited and a little bit cocky in the sense of thinking, well, I bowl 25 overs a day. How hard can 4 overs be? Well, after Mark Bottini had bashed me out of the ground the first 2 balls, I realized that 4 overs can be really hard and also very long as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So the comeback, not so great. Only lasted a couple of games, but actually didn't enjoy the comeback so much, but enjoyed the thought of the comeback, the training, and just the idea after almost 10 years that I would be playing cricket again in an environment or that sport, that thing that you know that you're comfortable doing, that you can kind of do without thinking too much. You know which end of the bat to hold, that sort of thing. But the reality was that 10 years and everything else, it had gone. Cricket had moved on. Attitude had moved on. Certainly batsman attitude with 2020 had moved on. They were very aggressive, and you couldn't come in and do what I was doing, which is bowl military medium pace.
No.
And kind of hope to survive.
Yeah. Things had changed in a big way, hadn't they, from a batting point of view, particularly in the 2020s. There was there's no longer sort of having a look as a batsman for a couple of balls. It's straight away aggressive, try and hit you out the ground from the first ball of the innings. So it's.
I thought I might get away with 3 or 4 balls while somebody had a look, but no, none of it. The game had certainly moved on.
So after, so you've sort of had the comeback, and I mean, I suppose with the comeback, even though it didn't go as you would have liked, it's one of those things where if you perhaps hadn't done it, if you turned it down, maybe now you would regret not, at least giving it a try and getting back into the game and things like that.
No, it was something I had to do. I think you're 100% right that if I'd said no at that point, I would have still been perhaps kicking myself, wondering if I'd said yes, where life would have taken me. To be honest. So yes, although it didn't work out, it was something that I had to do. But it's also something I can kind of put down to experience, and not a bad one.
Yeah, of course.
So there's no negative again in that it didn't work out. It was an opportunity. At 40, you would say there were limited hope that it was going to work out in the first place. But nevertheless,
for sure.
And again, glad that I got into that and had a look, because maybe if I hadn't, I'd be sitting here at 52 going, oh, I can still do that.
Yeah.
When I've got evidence to show at 40 that I was nowhere near. So
yeah, that's cool, I suppose. So obviously, away from the cricket pitch, you've had some issues, which thankfully, you've come out the other side of. On December 8th, 2008, you were arrested at Gatwick Airport on suspicion of smuggling cocaine. Now, obviously, people will wonder how a professional sportsman went from being a professional sportsman to then being, arrested at Gatwick Airport smuggling cocaine. Could you kind of explain just like how that came about and how it affected you, obviously, going forward from there?
Now, I understand how people can be surprised that a professional sportsman can go from some place that people think is such a high place, and it is, to potentially such a low place as importing drugs.
Mm-hmm.
But first of all, I'm not going to make any excuses. That was done, and that was wrong of me on any day of the week, at any time of the week. That was completely a poor decision. But what I'm getting into is that whether you're a sportsman or not, you can get yourself into a state. And because
Oh
you're
yeah.
a sportsman, in my case, doesn't mean, or an ex-sportsman, doesn't mean that you haven't necessarily got issues, whether those
Yes.
be financial issues and all things. In my case, it was more financial than anything. And we're not talking about being down to your last £1,000,000 or your
Yeah.
last £100,000. We're talking having no money in the bank,
Yeah.
and the fear factor that goes with all of that. Now, none of that makes what I did right in any way, shape, or form. But what I found out, it can get you into a place where you can just make such poor decisions because the only thing that's on your head is getting out the perceived hole that you're in, and that's where I was, and that isn't an excuse. That's just the fact of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
Financially, I was nowhere. That didn't mean now loads of people are financially challenged and don't do what I did.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying any of that makes it all right, but in the place of explanation, um, I was in a place where, let's just say, if I needed to get to an appointment, I didn't have the bus fare. Um, I was afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I panicked and just did made the most stupidest of choice, which was to go and try to import cocaine to make a bit of cash. And as you point out, I was caught on my return to the country and eventually sentenced to 13 years in jail.
Can you talk me through that feeling of as you've gone through Gatwick and you're coming through? Because like I know myself, like, and I know people who've made poor decisions because of the amount of financial strain that they're under. Um, Financial strain is something which I feel doesn't get talked about enough in terms of, like, these days you hear a lot about people who've obviously got mental health problems or substance abuse problems or gambling debts, whatever it may be. There's a lot of stuff about that, but I do feel sometimes where, like, there's not enough about the just the pure strain that's put on families or people who are
Well,
struggling to feed
I
themselves or to get to
well, I
places.
think I think it's a place where surely we realize that um, financial financial health, or a lack of financial health, and mental health go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
They're not
Absolutely.
separated.
No, no.
Yeah. If you're
Yeah, man.
financially challenged, you're going to be hard pressed to keep your mental health in a good place, because there is worry there. And as regards to things that people worry about in this world that we live in, I would imagine finance is at the top of it for
Absolutely.
a
Definitely.
whole host of people. So when I talk about mental health, I talk about pretty much anything that can affect your mental health. Yeah, whether
Yeah, oh,
that's
yeah.
finance or whether that's substance, whatever the case may be, that can get you into a place where, from where you are, it's a dark place, and from that dark place, you make very poor decisions.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm
absolutely.
no expert, but that's been my experience. And things only got better in my world when I started thinking more in a positive way, when I wasn't in that dark place anymore. And that dark place was that emotional dark place or that mental health dark place, where from there, it's hard to get to the good stuff, get to the positivity.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
It becomes the
it's
darker
very
and darker.
difficult, isn't it, to get out once you're in that hole um, of just emotional pressure and strain and struggling with your mental health. It's very difficult to drag yourself out, and it can be very difficult to make good decisions because of the strain that's put on you. Um, so yeah, so you've been arrested. Um, I was just wondering what you felt like as you went through the airport. As you're
Well,
coming in, you knew you had the stuff on you, and you were going through customs,
I'll
or
be honest with this. Of course, that's a question that people want to ask, and I
mm,
understand why. On a personal point of view, we are now 10 to 12 years past the event.
yeah,
And let's just say, if I said that that was the worst event in my whole life,
hmm,
and that I'm reluctant to keep reliving it,
yeah, okay, absolutely,
if you
there's
see
no
what I
problem.
mean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
there's no problem.
listen, I'll say this. The reason people ask is because they can't imagine, I would imagine, how you would feel in that situation.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's all that. It was so intense and so afraid, um, so panicky that you think the whole world is watching you, and every glance is an accusing glance. It's back in that space in your head
yeah,
where you can't find anything positive, but here you are. Um, I think people get the gist of that,
yeah, of course,
but
yeah,
I'm reluctant to keep going over it in the sense from a personal point of view. Um, I understand people are interested, but from a personal point of view, it's the worst experience. So to keep reliving, and when you do that and you talk that story, of course you bring the emotions up again.
yeah, yeah. No, I can understand that completely. Yeah. Um, so obviously you were sentenced to 13 years in prison. Um, would you rather move on to after prison, or like I was going to ask you sort of like basically what it was like for you in prison, because obviously you were a fairly well-known person due to your sporting accolades and stuff like that. But if you'd rather, we can just move to after that.
Well, I'd say this about prison. Prison isn't, in my experience, designed to be a nice place.
No.
It's kind of meant to be the sort of punishment for naughty people. So I didn't enjoy the experience of being in jail. There are lots of challenges. Um, but I guess that's part of why prison is there, to go, if you don't do this, you'll go here, and it's not going to be very pleasant.
Yeah.
And in a lot of places, it wasn't. I don't think it was especially bad for me because I'm known. Um, to be perfectly honest, it wasn't that sort of environment. I think a lot of people are more just kind of find their way of coping themselves. So
Yeah.
even if they're interested, they can't be interested for too long because they've kind of got their own stuff to get on with
Yeah.
about how they're going to deal with their stuff. Because believe it or not, I mean, it's an emotional place.
Yeah. I
People
bet.
see the macho side of it, but if you think about what's going on in people's life, it's impossible for it not to be an emotional place, if you see what I mean.
I do. Yeah. I can imagine that it's not a nice place, but I can imagine that it's a place which is full of kind of raw emotion um, on a daily basis from day to day as people uh, kind of struggle, or they are feeling trapped and
People are trying different things and going different ways to get through their pain because nobody's enjoying the experience. So they're using different things to get through. Um, so that's jail. But having said that, I suppose jail is designed to be that way. It's a
yeah,
deterrent.
yes, yeah, of course.
So in that sense, not a great deal to kind of add,
No,
um, about this, but it was all that.
What was the first day out of, like, your first day upon release? Like,
Okay. Can I ask you a question?
yes,
What size are you?
8, 9.
8 and 9. Okay. Imagine you've been wearing a size 6 for 6.5 years,
Yeah.
and then on that day, you finally took them off.
Wow. Okay. I
Yeah.
like that. I quite like that
Yeah.
metaphor. That's a good one.
You get that?
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
fully get that.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, where it's not joy, but the level of relief is just massive.
Yeah.
Just massive.
So did you know quite far in advance when you were going to get released, or was it a fairly short term sort of
No,
decision?
you can kind of gauge it in the sense that you have to meet certain targets. So as you go through the system, you can gauge that you're kind of coming towards the end, or that there's a chance that you may be released. But in my case, I had a fixed date,
Right.
in the
Okay.
sense that I was sentenced to 13 years, and I was going to serve 6.5 of those years and then be released on license, unless in the meantime I did something silly
Yeah.
and I wasn't allowed to go home for whatever reason. So I had an actual date that I was working to since the day I was actually sentenced. I knew on that day that potentially, if I behaved myself and went through, that I'd be released.
Do you when you came out of prison, did you have like a plan in terms of what you were planning to do, or did you did you have like a positive
Yeah,
attitude and you had like plans that you wanted to
no,
take forward from there?
I had a definite plan, but the plan was my attitude. Not necessarily going that I'm going to do this particular job or that particular job. For me, the important thing was the attitude I was going to have, because things were different. I would suggest that perhaps I needed a thicker skin, because, of course, what you've done, people are going to react to. So not
Yeah.
everybody is actually going to be welcoming. So you'll need, in order to make this a success, you'll need to stay confident. You'll need to look at this positively, because there'll be times where perhaps people won't agree, but you still have to surge ahead. You still have to make a life and all those things. So it was more about getting my attitude right before I came out, because, for want of a better phrase, you know there are going to be obstacles. You know there are many things that's actually going to go on, that at times that it isn't necessarily, the world isn't always going to look at you favorably.
Yeah, of course.
But in spite of that, you go, or I went, I'm still going to succeed. So that becomes not insignificant, but you just go, okay, this is my expectation, but I still need to go ahead. I still need to go and knock on another door. And it's more having that attitude I identify, perhaps of a way of being successful again. Because, of course, there are going to be challenges. But let's face it, even if you haven't done the things that I've done, they're going to be challenges in achieving your goals. And you
Yeah.
need to stay positive. So I'm saying, especially in these circumstances, because perhaps it's so easy to go, oh, this is against me, that's against me, the whole world's against me. And what you tend to do when you're in that place is you give up.
Yeah, and I can, just from speaking to you and about your experiences, you can understand why when people come out of prison, they struggle, or if they are not able to have a positive mindset to change or to do things, and they struggle with their mental health. You can see how people then go on to make further poor decisions.
They go so hand in hand. I would suggest, and again, not a mental health expert, if you're in a place of hopelessness, how can you not struggle with your mental health?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
How
impossible,
can
isn't it?
you everything? If you're in a place of hopelessness, everything you look at, you're looking from that negative space. The effect that has on your mental health and your physical well-being.
Decision making, everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
So also, obviously, since then you've written a book. You've had a play about your life, which I sort of came across when I followed you on Twitter. I saw some tweets about it. How did the play come about? Because that's not something necessarily that I was expecting to find. I expected
Well,
to find a book.
the play
And
is because I learned through my experience that mental health part was the important part. So the play is a two-man play, and it's essentially me talking to myself, giving that team talk. Yes, it's this, it's that, it's that, but you can do this. You can do this. Yeah? And
yeah,
that's
it's
how
cool.
it came about, really through the experience and actually recognizing that the real important part was the mental state and how you go from a place of perhaps being in despair or lack of hope to something a little bit more positive, and that was the idea, the motivation behind the play, showing Chris on his knees, and then a little bit later on, him being in a place where, yes, he's on his knees, but at least he's thinking positively about the future. Yes, I am going to
Yeah,
get up and I am going to run.
yeah, that must be something that
Just
you're
a
really
few,
proud of.
a lady came to, I think, a play in Cheltenham, and after the play, we would have an open discussion about
Okay.
the topic. And then she put her hands up and she said, "I get it, I get it." She goes, "What do you get?" She goes, "I get what you're saying." She goes, "You're saying that if you find yourself in a hole, it would be useful to remember or to understand that the same shovel you dug the hole with is probably in the hole with you."
Hmm.
Yep,
It's really good, that, isn't it?
the one.
Very good.
If you find yourself in a hole, let's just say, if you realize the shovel is in there with you, you're in a better place than despair.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah? Even if you don't use the shovel, at least you've got an option that you think, well, I know the shovel is in there somewhere. Even though I'm going to cry now, later on, I could go and find it. It's a better place.
Yeah, definitely.
I only try one, but it's a better place.
That's
You
it.
know, that's really how the play came about, trying to tell that story, that mental journey from a place of, wow, I've really mucked this up and nothing can come of this. It's all over. Till later on and go, yeah, that was really bad. But actually, um, things can still happen for you. You can still do this and you can still do that. And that subtle change makes the world of difference in your mental health.
Yeah, I think so. So obviously now just by speaking to you, you seem very positive. You seem to be happy. What are you up to at the moment?
Well, I'm up in Nottingham and I'm doing some coaching, ICM, coaching the young kids. A little bit of that. I do quite a lot of talking these days, going to schools and universities and telling that story, because the story, I'm not telling it from a sportsman point of view. I'm telling it from a human point of view.
Yeah,
And as we've touched on the whole mental health issue, we all have mental health, or we all have times where we feel challenged. And in those times, so I'm not here to tell people what decisions to make or anything like that, because people will make their decisions. I'm just saying that if you find that perhaps you're in a place you dug a hole for yourself, just remember that there's life after the hole. There's life after whatever the muck up is.
couldn't have put it better myself. No, that's quite right. So we had just a couple of questions. So if you've just got a couple of minutes, there's only, I think it's 2 or 3 questions which people sent in. And then I'll leave you go about your day because I appreciate you've given me a lot of your time. So the first question was, if you could change one thing from your whole life, what would it be? But I mean,
do you know, the obvious one would be going to jail.
Yeah.
But it's really not that simple. Only in the sense I learned so much from that experience. Would I want to lose that experience and lose all that information? It's just a strange thing. Here we go. Save more. Nice and benign. Obviously, there's loads of stuff that, but you know, some of the mistakes has been such a big learning curve. Sometimes it's hard to actually give it back for the information that you've got, so to speak. But trying to think. Yeah, probably invest a little bit more and party a little less.
Yeah. I think the thing is those experiences and everything which has happened to you has made you who you are today. If you take away those experiences, then do you lose a part of yourself? It's a tricky one. Jamie, who's one of my co-hosts on the TV and Films podcast, he said, has the ECB offered any support to you, or anyone sort of reached out to you over the years since you were kind of released from prison and stuff?
No, the ECB haven't. But I would say, like with all things, there are people who are your friends and people who rally around you, and people who aren't. And in this circumstances, it's exactly the same. So those friends have rallied around, and those who aren't have kind of kept their distance and don't want to be involved. But I'm not saying that from a negative point of view. When you do stuff, people do choose, you know, and not everybody choices that you make, and that's more than fair enough. That's what people are there to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The other question is basically the same question. It's just worded different, so I'm going to leave that one. Okay, guys, I'm going to leave Chris to go along his day now. You can check him out on Twitter at Claremont Chris. Check me out on Twitter at AceCast_Nation, and check all our shows out: video Ace Podcast Nation at YouTube, and audio sites at all your usual podcasting apps and platforms. Chris, thank you ever so much for joining me, mate. I really appreciate all your time.
Man, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, buddy.